Wonderful. Well, I make it 11:02 or whatever time that might be in your time zone. So thank you very much for joining us. So my name is Dan. I'm the Key Account and Partner Training Manager for CYP Europe. And with me is Kevin Cray. Good morning, Kev, again.
Morning, everybody.
Who are
Welcome
you
along.
and what do you do? It's like blind date, isn't it? Who are you and where are you from?
I'm Kevin Cray. I'm a technical director. Oh, new product technical director. It's a long title. Your title's now longer than mine, isn't it, Dan? What's your full title?
Yeah, Key Account and Partner Training Manager. But yours has got the word development in there as well somewhere.
Yeah, that's always good.
Development,
good.
Director, Partner, something.
Yeah.
So yes, to say we do like long product titles, and we do like to share the joy of all of the products that we make, the solutions, etc. So today's is all based around AV troubleshooting, what sort of system problems you might encounter, how you might look to resolve them, and as I say, do feel free to pop in the chat or just to unmute if you'd like to ask a question. So let's move forward with the session. Many of you know we are known for signal management and signal distribution products. I won't go through all of these, but you're probably aware we have a wide range of products that can cover a whole range of different markets, different applications. So we've got a whole host of videos on those separately as well. But today's session, what are we really going to look at? So resolving typical installation issues, how to troubleshoot an AV system, signal path analysis, and ways to manage or overcome system incompatibilities. And to be honest, there will be other things as well. This is just really sort of highlights of what we're looking at, but you will see that as we go through the session. So this, sorry, Kev, carry on.
Yeah, so this is a sort of flow chart that I put together a little while ago. I think we featured it in one of our RIC catalogs brochures once as well. So it's just, obviously this type of flow diagram, it's not really possible to cover off everything that may happen. And we'll go through some sort of nuanced examples as we go through. But the idea is we're just going to travel through this flow diagram and discuss things as we go.
Exactly right, and you are spot on, Kev. So that flow chart and actually another one separately are both available to download on our website. Just go to the home page, scroll down to the bottom, and it's actually part of this ISE 2020 show guide, but we are planning to make it available separately as well after this session. So as I say, do feel free to download that though, if you would like to. So let's get into it. I'm going to let Kev lead most of it. I'll chirp him where required, but yeah, feel free to start away, Kev.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, you've got, yeah, we're talking about when there's a problem. So we talk about when we discover the problem. So, you know, first of all, you know, is the problem being discovered in the initial installation stage, or is it being discovered in a post-installation callback? Now, in an ideal world, we want to discover all these problems in the initial stage. So like all good integrators, you know, you're probably setting up systems, or your customers are setting up systems in their office, in their facilities before they roll them out to the customers. Sometimes this isn't possible, and we all accept that. Sometimes jobs can be a last minute thing through no fault of ours. And we don't get that opportunity. But let's just go through it from the point of view of the initial installation and design stage. So we set things up and we kind of hit a problem. You know, whether that's an audio or video problem or a lack of consistency in the system. So at that point, really what we want to do is review the system design. So we review the system design, and what we're looking for here is, have we met the specification? Have we got the right products in there to meet what's actually needed? So we can review this literally on paper and make sure that we understand the brief and make sure that we've got the right, you know, the right hardware, whether that's the sources and the TVs that produce the right resolutions that we're our customers asking for, or whether that's the associated equipment like AVRs and CYP equipment that might be in there as well. So then from that point of view, we can move on and we can go, well, actually, there's some kind of installation error here, or the installation is correct. So if there's an installation error, like, oh yeah, we haven't got that projector yet, what's the spec for the projector, make sure we get the right one, or yes, we've specified all the right equipment, let's get them in and build. So we can, if either way, we end up with this resolving it or having a hardware review of the specification.
We're just putting another bit here, Kev, which you and I mentioned before the session, but there are tools that can help people on site, of course, which we'll speak about a few later, but that can include something as simple as a cable tester. Yeah. But we've put a note on here that, of course, issues within the system could be a variety of things, many of which we will discuss as we go through today. But you are right. Yeah.
It is amazing how common it is that it's cabling or cabling interference that causes problems in systems. So I mean, that's a basic, that's a pin-to-pin tester, CAT tester. You can get, I would advise you to get something slightly more advanced than that, but that at least lets you know that your CAT cable is actually terminated correctly. What's also is more advanced ones that might tell you the cable distance. So the CAT cable is 60 meters or 90 meters or something like that, so that you know what specification of equipment you need to ensure that you can send your signal across the cabling infrastructure. This is not a biggie for most of you. Most of you will be doing this, or your customers will be doing this.
Yeah, and just to say, as they do on all good television programs, other makes and brands are available. This is purely one that I picked up from Google. Yeah. So let's carry on with the session from there. So you're right, Kev. Yeah, if the installation is correct, then that's it.
Yeah. So in this sort of thing, you are looking at. So if you know that your CAT cable infrastructure is, the longest run is 60 meters, and you want 3G 4K. Then at 60 meters, you need to make sure you specify the correct type of hardware, whether that's SDVoE hardware or AV over IP hardware, whatever that is. You need to make sure that you actually specify the correct hardware. So if you want that and you specify an HDBaseT Lite product, for example, then actually that cabling infrastructure is fine for 1080p, but not for 4K, 3G 4K. 4K 6420, for example. So it is worth going through this process. I mean, I know it seems like it's quite obvious, but it does have that site related detail. So you're talking about having that site related doing that survey on the site, having that cabling infrastructure run, so we know what those distances are, because it might be that you know what it's like on site. You're not always sure exactly where your CAT cables are going to run and how they're going to run through the building, and so you can't always be 100% sure what that final distance is going to be, and it's not always easy to do that before you get to site. But we can try and judge it, and then we make sure we pick the right technology that provides that at distance transmission that we need. And it's quite common at that point for there'll be cabling problems. It's not necessarily just that maybe the CAT cable, the fiber cable is too long. It might be that in the case of CAT cable that how the cable is physically run through the building means maybe it's running parallel with some power, and this can cause distortions in the CAT cable, and so you can get errors and basically more like the DDC channel, the display data channel, where you get all the EDID and the HDMI start-off sequence going on. So this is where you could get errors. For example, HDCP is going off between an HDCP source and screen multiple times a second. You only need 1 0 to be read as a 1, and that will cause an HDCP error. So that kind of interference that can happen with a cable, it can be quite damaging in the system. So ways to think about that is to manage how the cable's laid, and also to think about using shielded CAT cable, which will give you more protection from that type of electromagnetic interference.
Wonderful. Let's just quickly summarize that then. So you find a problem with your system, you review the system design. If you then go in and you correct that installation error, you then have potentially resolved the problem. So good start. We've already potentially resolved one thing, which is great. So let's move on then, Kev. So if the installation looks physically correct, what do we do next? Where do we go?
Well, we've kind of jumped forward a little bit anyway. So we move forward here. We've just been talking about this hardware review. So this is where we're checking, and it might be that at this stage we can take that CAT tool onto site, and we know now that the CAT cable's in position. We know that its length. We can judge its pin to pin accurate and it's working, and we know it's 50 meters. We know it's 70 meters. We know it. We know the distance, so we can make sure that the correct hardware is involved there. You know, this can be simply as well that you've got various sources with various capabilities, and then we've all been there. The customer then makes a decision that he's going to upgrade something, and he takes something that's been, you know, a 1080p system, and suddenly goes, I want 4K in here. I want the 4K. Just, you know, for example, just Apple TV or something. He's going to change it to 4K. So this changes your hardware specification, because you might have specified stuff for 1080p. So you can get this mismatch of hardware and specification. Normally this is driven by the end user sort of making changes, because we've thought about this all the way through, but we all know how often that type of thing can happen. So at that point, we may need to correct hardware specification to deal with this situation. Or maybe a CAT cable has had to be run around the building in a way we didn't imagine it would be, and so that's longer. So we need to think about, maybe, you know, if it's 4K, maybe we need to move, because suddenly the cable is 80 meters long, not 60 meters long. So maybe we have to think about going to HDBaseT2 technology, which will deliver 4K at 100 meters, as opposed to HDBaseT1 full technology, which will only go about 65. So, you know, there's lots of things that can happen during the first physical elements of the installation that mean that you might need to change hardware through no fault of anybody's, just the physical reality of the site.
That actually, Kev, just on the fly, has made me think again, if your customer does call you and say, oh, suddenly nothing works, it's all stopped working. Probably a good question is, have you had any work done in the house? For example, for all we know, they've just had their electrics rewired, and the electricians run all the power cables next to those existing CAT cables. Yep, so again, possibly just another question. If the customer phones up and says, is it faulty, you know, something's not working, maybe they could look at, have you had any big changes in the environment? Yep. And of course, then look at, as you say, the other bits you've mentioned there. We've highlighted a few examples here as well, many of which I think you've covered there, Kev. But for example, do all the products support the same video timing? Does the audio match? So are you trying to send multi-channel audio to a product that only accepts 2-channel? Have they checked the topology of the system, which again, we've pretty much covered. But again, it's a logical step to take. Just make sure everything is sort of hypothetically in the right setup. And also then, yes, again, like you've said, Kev, if they've introduced a 4K product into a 1080p system, does everything actually match? Does it all have the same capabilities? So many points you've covered, but we've just highlighted those on screen as well. Yeah,
there's a few classic things happening. I mean, like you bring up a good point, Dan, where you're talking about what's happened on site. This is more of the callback kind of stuff that's later on, but a classic is that if we take a residential installation, just because it's an easy example, and all of your AV racking is all in the garage, which essentially these days we don't put cars in, we put bikes and other equipment and boilers and all this type of stuff in there.
Kids' toys.
And what's happened is the customers decided that they're going to put a freezer in there, and they've just connected the freezer to the same ring main that all your AV kit's on. So in a freezer and a fridge and these type of things, you have what's called a start surge, which is when the compressors all kick in. It, for a split second, draws more power than its physical rating will show on its specification sheet, just because that split second. And this can cause errors, especially with HDCP that relies on the voltage signal traveling across the HDMI cable. So, you know, adding that to the end user, they don't see that as a problem and wouldn't even think to mention it unless you ask. So, you know, but putting that on the same ring main as all of your rack of AV equipment, actually, you've got quite a high chance of it causing a problem. Not massive, maybe like 1 in 10, but you've still suddenly introduced this possibility of HDCP errors. And how that would come up for the customer would be that their screen goes blank and comes back. Because HTTP is kicking off multiple times a second. One checksum that doesn't work means the source will stop outputting its video and will resend the HTTP. So if we don't get the same distortions, which in that setup, the compressor's not likely to start again in that short period of time, the picture will come back. But then an hour later or 3 hours later, it happens again. And it's because of this, how this works. So it's very interesting that you bring up those elements that we don't always think about, which is what else has happened on site, what else has been introduced, because it could be something that's completely non-AV that's been connected to the same mains ring as your AV that could cause the problem.
Yeah, so sort of environmental changes then really within the setup. Yeah, super. So if we do have that mismatched hardware, what might we do?
Yeah, so if we've learned then that, you know, we've run the cat cabling, or we've got this situation, maybe we need to replace something. So we might need to, we could pull out some cat cabling and put in shielded cat cable if we need to, or we might go from HDBaseT1 to HDBaseT2 because the cat cable infrastructure is a little longer than we originally thought. So we can deal with that and we can resolve it. Now, again, if we've got a good site survey and all the cables run, we can do this at the office and we can check this at the office. But as we say, it's not always possible to completely set up an identical system at the office. We know the cable runs aren't going to be the same. They're not running through the house anymore, but we can have a good go at that and we can resolve a lot of this before we get there. So if the hardware then is correct, basically we go to checking the simple things like the power of the hardware. So this can be whether it's in the initial stage of the installation or whether it's a post-installation callback. So we just need to go to this very simple process of making sure things are all powering correctly. There's always one thing that's always I'm always slightly jealous of IT technicians, which is, you know, if I ask you what is going to be the response when you phone an IT technician and tell them you've got a problem, what are they likely to say?
Answers on a postcode, please. Postcard even, yeah.
They're going to say, turn it off and on again. Now, I've always been slightly jealous of that because if we look at our AV hardware these days, well, they're becoming more and more like computers all the time. And so turning things off and on again, you know, is not always a good way of solving a problem, but it's a good way of seeing if the problem is being driven by the source. Because if the problem's being driven by the source, then turning it off and on again may resolve it. If it's not, then it won't. So it's an interesting thing to take from that world, which is actually, it helps you determine where the problem is. But also we've got to look at all of our power. We've got to look at and just make sure everything's powered up, everything's working, and we haven't got any faulty PSUs or fuses blown in the system. So this is a step that we all probably do, but it's quite easy to jump over and to not check, and it's really worth checking, especially on a post-installation callback. So if then we have if we find anything that's faulty, we can replace it. We can put a new fuse in. We can use a new power cable. We can check a new PSU, and we can replace it, because the reality is PSUs are just as likely to go as anything else. So we can then resolve that. So now we get to the more sort of interesting areas where we're talking about the hardware configuration and basically more of the DDC channel. So that's the display data channel, which has all of the HDMI startup sequence, the EDID, and the HDCP. So I'm gonna give a really simple, and this is my house, right? Okay, so I don't have a multi-room AV system. I have a multi-room audio system. If any of you know me, I'm more of an audio freak than a video freak. I have a nice TV. I have a nice OLED. So I've got an LG OLED. I've got a Denon 6G AVR, and I've got your standard sort of sources: a Sky satellite box, Apple TV, Xbox, Blu-ray. So they've all got sort of CEC on, which, as we all know, CEC, it's kind of good in a simple setup. So that's all of it. It's just contained. But if I pick up the Apple TV remote, and the Apple TV is a 4K, and it's the whole system's Dolby Vision. If I pick that up and I press the menu button, and the Apple TV starts up, CEC will go through the rest of the system and basically turn everything else on, apart from my Blu-ray player, which I've turned the CEC off because I don't need it to come on unless I want it to come on. And let's be really, really negative. And this does happen. Let's say 50% of the time that I pick that Apple TV box up, remote up, and I press menu, firing that up first, 50% of the time, I don't get a picture on my TV of the Apple TV box. If I do it differently, I pick up the TV remote and I power the TV. Let's just say, I mean, nothing's always perfect, but let's just say 100% of the time, even though it's probably more like 99, I get my Apple TV first time I look at it. Why is this? This is just a bunch of sources, an AVR, and a TV. Why is it that I can consistently get AV failure if I use the Apple TV remote to power the system on first, but I don't when I pick up the TV remote and power that first? And this is just trying to explain to everybody that actually there's some stuff in an AV system that can only be solved by ensuring that everything boots up in the correct order. So when I'm pressing my Apple TV on, which is the menu button, what's happening? Well, the Apple TV has a quick EDIT exchange with, and at this point, you remember the EDIT exchange happens via the 5-volt line, there's HDMI startup sequence. So things on standby respond. So before the amp turns on, before the TV turns on, they get responses saying, oh yeah, the TV's Dolby Vision compatible, the amp's Dolby Vision compatible. The amp replaces the section of the EDIT for audio and tells the source that it can handle Dolby Atmos because it's a Dolby Atmos. We like a bit of Dolby Atmos. And then it starts outputting the video. But this happens very quickly, and the TV is not even on yet. So at that point, what's happening is the little bit of data that's kicked out down the DDC line that goes to the TV saying the incoming stream is Dolby Vision, you need to decode it, doesn't get there all the time in time for the TV to realize that. So the system, it goes through the system and the TV doesn't know it's Dolby Vision and it can't decode it, so it displays nothing. Whereas when I turn the TV on first, the TV is already ready, and the time everything else turns on, it will accept that little bit of header data, know it's Dolby Vision, and display correctly. So this is just an example of how the HDMI startup sequence is incredibly key, and there is very, very little we can do about it. This is the nuances of AV installations. So when you're programming the system, maybe you're programming your system with a control system, whether that's Crestron, Control4, whatever you like to use, RTI, you know, all of the above. It's really important to think about in every room how this system is starting. So when your customer says, watch a movie, how have you programmed it to turn stuff on? Because if you program that in the right way, you will get 99, 100% perfect, picture always appears. But if you program it in the wrong way and you throw all the sources on first, you're much likely to get more inconsistencies in getting your audio video picture to the screen. So in my simple system where we've just got a single room, this happens in this system. And I can regularly, you know, I've got about, as I say, 50% chance. Sometimes I do it at work, sometimes it won't. And this is all to do with this startup sequence and this DDC channel and the data that is traveling between these sources. Because the EDID happens whether the units are on standby or not, but all the other data needs the TVs and everything else to be on. It's really important that we understand this and we work this out in a simple way that actually everything powers on in the correct order. So sometimes you can get these inconsistencies, and it's all to do with HDMI startup sequence and how each product is booting up.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Just for reference, Kev, I will bring this up on screen, which obviously anybody watching it on demand can go back and pause, but it was just a quick summary of what EDID is. And effectively, as you said, it's that sort of communication sharing that says, I'm this product and I can do this, and I'm this product and I can do that. So I just thought I'd bring this up on screen just for anybody to have a bit of a look if they need to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple thing. It actually has loads of data. If you ever looked, if you've got an advanced analyzer like our XA4, you know, you can look at everything within an EDIT, and it will tell you the date that the thing was manufactured, you know, where it was, as well as thousands of resolutions and time thousands, a bit of exaggeration, but you know, so it's got a lot of data there. Most of the things we're interested in EDID is just video and audio compatibility. That's what we're really finding out. So EDID is source driven. So the source wants to know what capabilities of the downstream products are. Do you do Dolby Atmos? Do you do 4K? So it can set itself. This said, some sources do not respond to EDIT. They're just designed in such a way that they don't change. You know, the old Sky HD box didn't ever respond to EDIT. It just took no notice of it whatsoever. And so you just, you know, but a lot of sources do, but some don't. So it's not a perfect system. And also it does seem, I mean, I've had experience of this, that the EDITs within the television, literally the stored EDIT within the television, somehow can become corrupted. So we'll talk about ways of managing things like this as we go through later.
Well, in fact, look at that. That is a perfect segue, Kev, as if we'd practiced it.
Yes, if I knew what was coming.
But yeah, this is one of the options here, which we put in just to show that, again, if you are experiencing these sort of problems, there are ways to manage it. And this, for example, on screen is the RE EDID 4K22, which essentially is an EDID, an HDCP manager, and also has the downscaler built in. You said before, Kev, these can just be so useful on a site, can't they, to manage the way this is being handled?
Because they've got the three things. Admittedly, the scale is quite limited. It can only do 4K to 1080p, but for the cost of the unit and what it does, because it's got banks of EDITs, and you can literally pull an EDIT from a screen and store it. If you have the capacity, you could write an EDIT and put it in there as well. You can connect the USB to computer and you can write them in there. And it's got the nice HDCP management. So you can work out how you know, whether your HDCP is referencing the source or it's referencing the display, and that can make quite a difference. So, you know, a display that's 1.4 and a source that's 2.2, this can kind of make that work. So the couple between the EDID, the HDCP, the 4K 6G compatibility through it, and the idea of, well, actually I've got 4K but something's going on, I can downscale it to 1080p, and is that working? The thing to remember about anything that scales is that, you know, for a start, you lose HDR. You can't scale and have HDR, but it's reclocking everything. So if you have something that can do this just before us, normally this would go just before a screen. You know, when you scale something, you're reclocking it, so you're kind of naturally repairing any video errors that might have occurred. So it's quite a useful function. So if you think about it from the EDID, so if you think if we've got a complex system that's maybe it's an AV over IP system, so you've got a source, an AV over IP products and network hardware, AV IP receivers, maybe an AVR and a TV. So the EDIT chain is going all the way from the source, all the way through all that information up to the TV and coming back down again. The AVR replaces some of the audio and it comes all the way back through the system to the source. This is a long chain. You know, if you've got 200 meters of CAT there, you know, there's a lot of possibility for a 1 to be read as a 0 or a 0 to be read as a 1, because very minor interference, skew, So we're talking sine waves, aren't we? Square waves, sorry. Everything's a sort of square wave in digital, isn't it? So you know, it's up is 1 and down is 0. So anything that's read wrong there through that entire system could lead to an EDIT error. So when you put in a product like this, you're literally sticking it just before the TV and you're setting it up. I'm going, right, this is my thing here. I set it up. I've set to the right EDIT here. Now the EDIT chain is just a small HDMI cable. So you can see why these type of EDIT managers are popular in large installations. I mean, we've had many instances of mainly in the commercial world, where installers and integrators they just use these. They literally just order them as part of the job and they put them in because they can restore in the unit the exact EDIT that they need from the sources and drive it from there and drive it across this very short cable rather than across the entire system. So yeah, you're right, Dan. As a 5-minute mumble tells you, I am quite keen on these products.
No, absolutely. I think by the sound of it, it's taking away some uncertainty, isn't it? So again, if you're planning a system ahead of time, you know that this is going to be at the screen end of it. So you kind of take away a little bit of uncertainty with regards to that chain of signal data. And we have just put in a slightly more simple one here as well, which is a repeater, but also has the ability to manage some of the EDID.
Yeah, the EDID is a lot simpler on this, but it's also because it's got the repeater functionality. It's doing that almost like a scaler. It's doing that repair process as well.
Wonderful. And also a lot of our products have built-in EDID and or HDCP, but mainly EDID, don't they? So we've put a couple of example web GUIs here of products that can adjust that. So again, there's sometimes flexibility within the existing hardware that we have, like extender kits and presentation switches.
Yeah, I was going to say, all matrices have these type of things. AV over IP systems have these type of things, and a lot of individual RXs and TXs for at distance transmission will have something in them for this type of EDID management.
Yeah, great stuff. And again, just another simple example there.
Yeah. So again, you've got this is this HDCP mode. So again, you've got the three things. Disable, that's there because sometimes you have you put an AV product in a system, and the AV product is clearly HDCP compatible, and then suddenly your laptop or your MacBook starts putting out HDCP when you don't want it to, because your screen at the other end is a monitor, not a TV, so it's not HDCP compliant. It doesn't have any HDCP because it's expecting just a computer. So the disable HDCP is for these situations. So if you do that, then you must use a non-HDCP source. But you only normally do that when your screen is non-HDCP. So that's when you use that functionality. Because if you leave it on, as I say, lots of laptops and MacBooks start putting out HDCP because your AV bit of hardware in the middle, a matrix or whatever, is HDCP compatible. So it thinks, oh, I should put HDCP on it. So there's a disable function. So follow source, that is like normal. That's normally what HDCP does. It's source driven. The source says, I'm this copy protection specification. Everything else in the chain needs to be there. So the interesting one is follow display. So when you follow display, what you're saying is, look, no matter what HDCP comes into this CYP piece of hardware, I want you to put out an HDCP that's compatible with the display. Now, this will not work on a display that is not HDCP. So those classic computer monitors that are not HDCP compatible, it won't work. But it will work on a display that's, say, HDCP 1.4 and a source that's 2.2. So you can put follow display, 2.2 will come in, 1.4 will go out. So incredibly useful, and on both of those things are on a lot of products, whether it's in a web GUI or a menu system.
Wonderful. I just thought it's 11:30, just gone 11:37 by the looks of it. So I will quickly chat while I bring up the next slide. Are there any questions currently sitting in the chat, Kev? I can't see it my side as I'm sharing the presentation, but
not as yet. Not as yet.
No problem. That means we're obviously being clear and concise. That's
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah. Right, so moving on then. So again, we've checked our hardware configuration. So hypothetically, then you could resolve a problem like we've just discussed.
Stick in
Maybe,
the product, resolve it.
And hopefully then, if you've done that right, wonderful. We may have resolved another problem. We're good at this, aren't we, Kev?
Yeah, theoretically.
So where do we go next then? If the hardware configuration looks correct, what should we start doing?
Everything seems to be correct. We've specified the right products. We've had a quick look through the EDIT, the startup sequence, the HDCP, and everything's right. Or we've resolved it already. But essentially, we're still not getting either video or audio or both at the end display. So this is where we start to track and analyze signal to source to identify where the signal is being lost. So this is signal path analysis. So it's very easy to follow a signal path in AV. It shouldn't be complicated. It's relatively straightforward. It goes from here to here to here. It's not a massive audio mixing desk where actually these things can be confusing. It's relatively straightforward. So we need to start and we need to go, right, I'm not getting a picture on this display. Where is the signal not coming out of anymore? So we put in an analyzer. So really, this is hopefully you're aware of this is our battery powered USB. You can charge it for USB. You can plug it in via USB if you want to power it. And it's a battery in it, so it's got like 5 or 6 hours of use, depending exactly what you're doing with it. And really, these are a few £100. I thoroughly recommend. In fact, there's no excuse for not having one of these. There's no excuse. You need something like this, because what it allows you to do is it can be a pattern generator, so it can output stuff at different resolutions, so you can check your system before the sources are there. It's got a nice little HDMI cable tester, which will test premium certified HDMI cables, so you know everything's for proper 4K spec, and it has an analyzer. So we can plug it in after our source here, and we can go, is there a signal? Yes, great. Then it's going to the AVR. So we can then plug it in on the other side of the AVR. Make sure we're on the right channel. Is there a signal? No. Okay. So and we can do this at every stage. We're just doing this at every stage, and we're finding, because at some point the signal's not going to be there, because on your TV you're not getting a picture. So what this allows us to do is to identify where in our system we have a problem. So we know that the cable, the Blu-ray and the cable in this instance, we know the signal's there because we've tested it. And then when we're on the other side of the AVR, we're not getting that signal. So we now know that there's something going on with how the signal is passing through the AVR or anything else. We're just using an AVR, for example. If you've been in this industry enough, you realize that AVRs can be a common problem here. Not always, and some of them are fantastic and all of them work, but there's kind of, it's one of those things that there's so much going on in an AVR, and we kind of over the last especially 10 years have kind of cost them down to quite a low level. So we're not having to go at AVRs, but we just think it's a good place to put this. So we know the signal isn't there anymore, so we can start looking at why that is. Is this, and we thought we've done everything. So the AVR saying it's Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision compatible, for example. But does it actually need a firmware update? Is there something where the manufacturer is advertising it as such, but actually they're going through a process because things happen when new technologies come out? So for example, Dolby Vision, all 4K products are capable of Dolby Vision 30, for example, but you may have to do a minor firmware update to them. We had to do on a few distribution amps, because you need to let this little bit of header information that tells everything downstream that this is Dolby Vision pass through without being mucked about with. So when you think about an AVR and you think about the fact that it's already overwriting EDID data, just because it replaces the audio section of the EDID data. So maybe this needs an update. Maybe this is what's going on. Maybe actually we've got the wrong specification or something. But this simple analysis tells us where the problem is. We can then look at what's resolving, firmware update it, resolve it, and then we can move forward.
Just thinking there, Kev, actually another good thing there is probably a good time to use the cable tester, because that HDMI cable coming out of the AVR to our point-to-point kit could be faulty. You said to me the other day, didn't you? Everyone assumes that a cable that's brand new is going to work out of the box or out of the bag.
But
most
it's
not always.
time a cable or any other piece of electronics that you ever buy, in my humble opinion, the most likely time it's not going to work is when you first turn it on or you first use it. Because whilst everything is QC'd, if you're making 1,000 of something, you're going to QC a certain percentage of them. But you're not going to, you know, unless we all want to pay 3 times the price for our equipment, you're not going to physically test everything that's coming out of the manufacturing facility. So actually, you know, a brand new cable, stick it in. Well, actually, that's the most likely time that cable isn't going to work, because once you've plugged it in and it works, actually breaking it is relatively tricky. But one bit of error on, you know, a tiny bit of a spot of solder on that particular pin that's crossing 2 pins over, meaning the DDC and the TMDS are suddenly linked. No, nothing, won't work, doesn't work. So yeah, you know, let's not worry about exactly what the problem is, but we know the problem's there and we know what we can do. We can test the cable, we can check the firmware, we can check the specification, we can do all these things, and hopefully we can then get to a situation where we can resolve it, we can check it through the system, and now we find that we have a picture on the TV. They are incredibly useful bits of kit. They're not complex. You know, the XA4s we have are, you know, much more expensive, yeah, over £1,000. Again, technician rubbish on pricing, but probably 1,500 if I said to that. But the XA4s go a lot deeper. You can pull out, you know, you can look at the hexadecimal codes for the HDCP checksums and stuff like this. In the vast majority of cases, you know, when we're installing stuff, we don't really need that, you know, but we do need something. And the XA3P, especially because it's portable, battery powered, is an incredibly good bit of kit. And I encourage you to either get one if you're an installer, or encourage your installers to buy one. Occasionally we do have promotions on them. I know we did one last year, so look out for those. There may be some in the future.
But we will just quickly touch on that. We won't go into all the features.
Yeah.
We've covered
lovely
this.
Case comes with a lovely case.
A lovely case, which I think in a moment, through the wonder of PowerPoint, will actually get bigger and bigger onto the screen. But let's not ruin that surprise. So as Kev's already said, it does have the analyzer mode, so it can analyze an incoming signal. All of that's displayed on the little OLED screen, which again is just nice and easy to use. It's got the pattern generator mode. So again, you've got a variety of output patterns that you can use, including different resolutions, different timings. And it does have the cable test mode as well, which Kev said. Basically, just looking on screen here, plug the HDMI output to the HDMI input with a cable and ask it to send a signal through it. And it will then come back.
I'm just going to make a note here, because, or I'm going to note to people, like, HDMI cable testing is a nightmare. I mean, we don't sell them openly, but we actually make a specialized piece of hardware that costs many thousands of pounds, that we sell to cable manufacturers, which is multiple inputs and multiple outputs, and they can test their cables. They can do QC on their cables with them. It's an incredibly complex thing. So when you're testing an HDMI cable, test it multiple times. A 3G cable that's pretending, due to marketing spin, to be a 6G cable will fail every time. A 6G cable will normally pass, but every so often you might get it failing. So it does say this in the manual, that do test them multiple times, but test things 2 or 3 times. If it fails every time, then it isn't a 6G cable and it will not pass 6G, 4K 6G. If it passes, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Kev. Yeah, well worth specifying, because the testing on this unit has been set very stringent, hasn't it? So that it is very accurate, but it does mean, yeah, as you say, test the cable maybe 2 or 3 times, probably 3 times just to be sure. But yes, otherwise all good. So that's just a little brief look there at the XA3P, and we did just touch on here. We are a little bit short of time, so I'm going to rush through this. But again, obviously, check the specification of cabling depending on the sort of system you're running. So do just consider the level of CAT cabling obviously pre-installation phase, but just bear that in mind,
Yep.
especially for longer distance runs.
And for reference, guys, HDBase 3 is coming out, and if you want to achieve 6G, because it's 4K 6G HDBase C3 chip, it will only go 100 meters on Cat 6A or above.
Yeah, very useful info.
It's so important. It's so important because the data that they're throwing down this cable now, you can't have interference. You can't. So you've got to use Cat 6A. If you use anything under that, you drop the distance down quite dramatically.
Fair enough. Super duper. Thank you, Kev. So if we've done our track and analyze, then in theory, if the signal is present to the display, then we have likely found that maybe there is a display issue of some sort.
Yep. Yeah, so it might be that I had this. It was actually at an AV or a hi-fi retail shop where there was a system that they were putting a 4K system in, and I'm not going to name the brand of TV, sorry, but the first HDMI input was 4K 6G. Now this isn't common, but this is just an example of how sometimes we can get mucked up. So the TV's listed as a 4K 6G television, but actually only one of the 4 HDMI inputs were 4K 6G. The other 3 were only 4K 3G. So I traveled hundreds of miles down to this site to help them, only to discover that actually it was not a fault with the TV, but it was the specification of the TV that nobody had bothered to check.
Oops. But it can happen. It can happen. Or obviously, to the extreme, the screen could actually be faulty. You could have a broken HDMI input or something. So again, if we've established that the signal is passing all the way through to our screen, then we need to look at the actual screen itself. If we've established that the signal is lost after product, whatever it might be, we've kind of covered some of the points there. In fact, I think we've covered quite a few of these, Kev. We would, look at the cabling. We would obviously make sure the hardware is correct as well.
Yep.
And
so if you're getting problems after HDBase T-kit, check the distance. Maybe look at those ends of those cat cables. If even like an inch of unwound twisted pair between the end of your cable and your plug, even an inch of that untwisted, those twists in a cat cable are error correction. If you ever made them, some of them are different to others. Some of them are tighter, some of them are slightly looser, and this is why we have a specification for which ones go where for cat cables. So even a small area of that being untwisted at the end of a cat cable because you've not pulled it through or you've not made it close enough when you plug it in, that can cause errors. So re-terminating those cat plugs is also a good option.
And we've just thrown in here, so again, yes, there might be the possibility that you need to replace cabling. And one of the things we wanted to touch on again is the actual, you've mentioned it, Kev, with the cable testing, but is your cable actually capable of sending the information you need it to send? And that's where we wanted to highlight here that, cables, this isn't just manufacturers saying our cables are great, which is a very common marketing trait, but it's actually saying these are premium HDMI certified by the HDMI organization.
Yeah, different to we tested it at 6G.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean anything. That certification, that little tag, that QR code means it's certified by HDMI organization, and this is true of premium HDMI cables or the new ultra high speed HDMI cables that are available from us. Well, we're taking orders now, available in a couple of weeks.
Exactly.
And the thing about these certification programs is what they're supposed to do. A cable is very different than a product. A cable is supposed to do everything within a specification. So if HDMI 2.0b specification has a list of stuff, an HDMI cable that's certified can do all of them, or an ultra high speed cable that's certified has been tested to do all of them. That's everything in that specification, because it's not a product that might do this bit or that bit. It's a cable. It's supposed to do all of them. So someone's saying, yeah, we've tested our ultra high speed cable and it can do 8K. Well, great. Can it do variable refresh rate? Can it do 4K at 120 hertz? Does it do eARC? Does it do Ethernet? But if you have this certification, then the cable has been tested and meets every technical parameter of the specification from which it's designed.
Yeah. And again, that is clarified by the fact that every single one of these cables will have the relevant certified QR code, which the end user can scan, or the installer, and it will take you through to explain that exact information. So again, it's certainly not a marketing thing. It is an actual test done and dusted. So in theory there, yes, we could have resolved an issue by replacing some cabling, which is good. But if we check and the loss is still occurring, where might we then go, Kev?
Well, again, so if we just go back to our HDR, we solve that problem, but actually we're getting a problem further on. So we carry on down the chain, and we still, somewhere between before the TV, we still get that signal loss. So we go back to our track and analyze, we go through it again, and we work out where we're not getting signal. And again, if that's after an HD-Base-T kit, we look at the cable, we look at the kit, we re-terminate them, we make sure we haven't got ends dangling off, or we make sure. So HD-Base-T, I don't even remember that originally HD-Base-T, the organization said nothing about this. And then as we moved to 4K, they suddenly went, oh yeah, don't bundle all your cables together. So out the back of your rack, if you've got a 16 by 16 matrix and you've got cat cables coming out, and you've brought them all down and bundled them all nicely together within a few meters of the matrix coming out of, at some point HD-Base-T started to tell us that don't do that, which was new, and all of us had to go, oh, we've been doing that for years, it's nice and neat, I like a neat rack, you know, this is. So now we separate them and we put them in different channels, so we don't have more than 6 groups together. HD-Base-T say it shouldn't be within the first like 5 meters or something, but actually in my experience that's a little bit over the top. Literally it's the first meter or two out of the products. Do not group massive HD-Base-T cables together, because they're still sending power and other data. They can interfere with each other, so just keep it a little bit separate.
Great stuff. So yeah, in theory, as you say, then if we've now found what the problem was, it was further down the chain, and we've done one of the steps we've spoken about, we've replaced the cable, we've replaced the hardware, whatever it might be. If you're still losing the signal in that same position, we're then moving on to these sort of final few steps, aren't we really, Kev?
Yeah, so and this is a sort of Portham key. I mean, I know it's slightly self-indulgent here, which is like, only after you've done all of these things should you phone me. In an ideal world, you should have done all of the things we've just spoken about if you're an installer before you pick up the phone and go, Kev, help, it doesn't work. Because that's what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you, where's it lost? You know, have you checked the, you know, I'm going to go through all that. And it's just expedient. And actually, it's a great educational tool for you to improve as an installer or an integrator if you go through that. So when you still have this problem, of course, you again get to a point where you contact the manufacturer. Now, we all know that if you phone CYP Technical, someone will pick up the phone and someone will help you. This is not, I'm not complaining about it, it's just a reality. Is that if we do that with a major AV brand, like who make TVs or games consoles or something, the chances of actually phoning and getting someone at the end of the phone to help you, not super high, but you've got to try and log it. If you've got a system where you've got multiple X brand TVs in your system, and one of those always causes you a problem, but all the other ones from that brand doesn't, you really need to let them know, because they are very good. You know, I've had discussions with LG and Samsung and Sony, and once they know and they can understand a problem, they will help. It's just that they don't necessarily talk to you directly. They may talk to us or someone else, but they will help, and they have rolled out many times, these guys. You know, they're not sitting in an ivory tower. They will help. It's just slightly harder to get the information fed to them, and they will resolve it, and they will come up with firmware updates to help it. So this is what happens, whether it's us or someone else, that we might have found an incompatibility. You know, it is impossible in the AV world to test every source with every screen, with every piece of intermediary hardware, whether it's a CYP hardware or an AVR or whatever. It's impossible to test all of those things together. So occasionally we will find an incompatibility, and this is where CYP, especially because we manufacture all our own goods, you know, they're all manufactured by us, they're all designed by us, we can resolve this. It might take a week or two, but that's pretty good. You know, if we find a problem, we just need to be able to identify it. We need to be able to reproduce it ourselves, which is why going through all that process before you contact us is really useful for us, because we know that the issues aren't all these installation and physical elements that could cause the problem. So then if we can then recreate the problem with similar hardware, because we do purchase quite a bit of hardware just to try and keep up. We have we'll make sure we have screens and consoles and SkyQs and, you know, and things like this. So we have all this stuff. So we can, if we can identify the problem, we can reproduce the problem, we can 95 times out of 100 we can solve it. Occasionally we can't, because it's more to do with something else further down, like a screen or something. But even then, you know, if we identify that the problem's actually something to do with someone else's kit, but actually we could do something about it, we will. We'll make a little thing. Maybe we slow down a handshake, we'll speed up a handshake. Maybe we manage the DDC channel. And if we can, we'll try and help. So then we can firmware update the product, and hopefully we can resolve it.
My graphic doesn't slide down to resolved. I don't think. Oh, let's try. Does it? Does it? Does it? It does. It does. There we go. I surprised myself. So
we've resolved it. So this is part of the process where we work with you. We get everything, all the information we can. We reproduce the fault. We can do it time and time again. Maybe not every time, but we know that, and we can help resolve it, and we can firmware update it. If at this page we just go, oh, and you've plugged this bit of kit in, whether it's a TV, an AVR, CYP bit of kit, everything breaks. Yeah. What's the word for when things just degrade over time? Entropy.
The word rings a bell, but I wouldn't be. I'm sure you're probably right.
I'm not,
the signal makes it clear. It's all good.
I'm not that clever, so I can't remember entropy. Things decay over time, so things will get. So it's possible that things break. So at that point, we go through a process, or a company, whoever they are, go through a process. We identify stuff, and we go, you know what? That might be broken. Often, from our point of view, what we do is we're trying to go through the process of trying to figure out whether it's our bit of kit or something else. What commonly happens is that you guys have done everything we've asked, or everything you've even spoken to us, and it is no longer possible for us to identify the fault is not with our product. Not that the fault is definitely with our product, but we can't say for certain that the fault is not. So after a bit of toing and froing there, we will probably then go, right, here's your RMA, or talk to your distributor, probably more accurately. We'll give you an RMA reference, talk to them, get the product returned. We will test it and advise you. So we can test it and advise you, replace it, repair it, and we can resolve the issue. So the only thing left is our unresolved analytical error, which happens most, you know, as I say, the vast amount of times going through this process will identify where the errors are in the system, where the problems are, where the signal is no longer present, where it's falling down. But every once in a while, you basically go through all of this process and you still get an error. You know, you've replaced it, we've done things. So the only thing to do at this point, and it's not great, but it's the reality of the situation, is to start again. And just make sure you've done everything, because did we miss something? Did we miss something simple? Entropy is caused by thermodynamics. Thanks, Google. Thanks, Joe. Decay. Well, okay, maybe that's not quite the exact word, but you get the general idea. What
I would do then, Kev, I think that's great. It's actually just gone 12, which is perfect. So we've actually now covered all of that main area. If you like, I will just quickly go through these couple of summary slides at the end.
Excellent.
If you want to just keep an eye, if anyone then puts any information in the chat
Yeah,
at this
if you've
point,
got any
anyone
questions,
feel
put them in
free
the
to
chat now,
ask.
guys.
Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. I'll just quickly rattle off a couple of little bits on screen. So this is just to cover that we do have previously, we've run a Pro AV Installation Essentials webinar, which covered things like EDID management, HDCP management, HDMI cables, signal path analysis, all sorts of bits like that. So if you wanted to, feel free to look that up on our YouTube channel. It was just to summarize as well the XA3P. We can't stress just how useful these are to have on site, or if you're, maybe part of the team that tests things when they come back to you. Your customer sends it to you, you want to test it before you return it to CYP. A cable tester and an analyzer and pattern generator could be a superb option. So again, we've just covered on here. It is lightweight, it's battery powered. It comes with that fabulous case on the right hand side, so you can keep it safe while you're having it out on site. And I will just go through these. But again, as we've said, the analyzer mode, pattern generator mode, and cable test mode. Kev's already touched on the XA4, which is the big brother, which is more likely for maybe a bench engineer, somebody that's doing this day in, day out.
Yeah,
but
our RMA engineers, both here and HQ in Taiwan and Taipei, we all use these for benching, because when you're doing things, you might need to go a little bit deeper. Is there some weird HDCP checksum that you can only see by looking at the hexadecimal for it?
And these, yeah, just to specify again, so for example, as they are more designed for this sort of purpose, they are powered by mains power. They're not battery powered, so you wouldn't carry it around and use it on battery. It has to be powered from the mains.
You can power it from most decent 5-volt USB outputs.
Wonderful. Oh, that's handy to know. We've put an image on here as well, and it is compatible as well with a software called Anapat. So as well as the useful information on screen, you can actually connect this to a laptop, desktop, whatever it might be, and use it with Anapat, which is again a very good way of analyzing and pattern, isn't it, Kev? It's a way of analyzing the signal more. Yeah,
it's just the associated software, so it's got everything on it that's on the menu and stuff like that. So if you want to use it with your laptop, you just literally connect USB, download Anapat, and you can use it. Again, for bench testing, it's very useful. You can muck about with edits and things like that. So it's a very useful bit of software.
Wonderful. Just quickly touching on as well, this is I think the last thing in here, but again, another thing that might be useful depending on the environment around the products is something like the XA surge protector. So again, this is designed if there is some sort of electrical surge through the HDMI cabling, this would basically take the fall rather than your expensive equipment at the other end. Just summarizing, we've got lots of information on our website at cypeurope.com, and as I mentioned, we've got probably 10 plus webinars on our YouTube channel as well from over the last sort of year or so. So any information, do feel free to check those out. But otherwise, just contact us if you have any more questions. Contact your local distributor, again, if you're interested in these products or the prices, that sort of thing. And any questions, feel free to unmute yourself now if you wanted to ask any questions. Otherwise, we will round off our little presentation.
There's nothing else in the chat, Dan.
Superb, wonderful. In that case, I think from Kev and I then, we would like to thank you for joining us for this session and for sticking through it all the way. That is fantastic, very kind of you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah, hope it's been useful. And as I say, any questions after, just contact any of the contacts that you have for CYP. But yeah, thank you everyone. Brilliant. Have a superb day. Thanks for your time, Kev. That's been very clear. Really enjoyed that. A nice one. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care now.
Take care. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.